Thank you, Steve, and hello. So, first of all, many of you will know that it was supposed to be Rebecca Heinemann up here talking to you. She was diagnosed with an aggressive cancer and was unable to travel, so I stepped in. Unfortunately, things then rapidly deteriorated, and earlier this week, Rebecca passed away. That QR code will take you directly to her GoFundMe. Now, I was going to encourage you all to donate towards her care. But it's now being used to help her children pay for her funeral arrangements. So I'd like you all please now to join me in a moment of silence for Rebecca, and in that time you can take a photo of that slide if you want to make a donation. All right. Okay, so I'm Antony Johnston. Who the hell is that, you may ask? Well, outside of this room, I am probably best known as the creator of Atomic Blonde, the movie starring Charlize Theron, which was based on a graphic novel that I wrote. I also write the award-winning Dog Sitter Detective Murder Mysteries, I'm professionally obligated to say that bit, the Brigitte Sharp thrillers, which are currently being developed for TV, and most recently, Can You Solve the Murder, which is now a Waterstones paperback of the year. I've also written screenplays, I have produced and directed short films, and also, what I probably am best known for in this room, I have written many, many video games. I have been doing this for a long time. I'm very tired. And I'm here to tell you that a great story is a great story, no matter in what medium, genre, or format it's told. I've written many different types of story in many different media and formats. Genres I've worked in include sci-fi, crime, espionage, westerns, rom-coms, sports, horror, fantasy, superheroes, YA, and even non-fiction. I've written books, comic series, graphic novels, including adapting multiple works by writers like Alan Moore and Anthony Horowitz into comic form, which is quite surreal. I've written video games, screenplays, short stories, and magazine articles. I've written games for the PlayStation, Xbox, for the iPhone, for VR headsets, a launch title for the Wii U, and of course for PC. I've written first-person shooters, third-person shooters, rail shooters, platformers, rhythm games, sports games, walking simulators, narrative-led puzzle games, you name it. Now, many authors, when they reach a certain level of experience, notoriety, fame, call it what you will, embark upon writing a book filled not with a story, but with their thoughts. So we produce volumes of essays filled with our thoughts, musings, and philosophies on the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. The problem for me is that whenever I've tried to do that, I quickly realized that the great majority of my thoughts are about writing stories. And sometimes life, as it relates to writing stories. And this, combined with a deep and lifelong fascination with the creative process in general and the craft of storytelling, means that rather than essays about the big existential questions of life, I find myself writing nuts and bolts advice about how to tell better stories. So instead of asking, do our decisions demonstrate that mankind has free will? I am more likely to ask, if your main character regularly makes terrible decisions, does it make your story better? To which the answer, by the way, is yes, of course it does. So that's why I'm here and what I'm going to talk about today. This is a distillation of decades of storytelling experience, which I'm going to give to you so that your stories can be the absolute best that they can be. And by the way, that book I mentioned, Can You Solve the Murder, the one that is a Waterstones paperback of the year, again, professionally obligated, that is also a game. It's what we used to call a game book, although nowadays we're all fancy and we call it an interactive novel. That is a direct result of combining my experience in video games and RPGs with my other career in crime fiction. It's almost an exemplar of what I'm talking about because all the principles that I'm going to explain here were used both to write the story in that book and to design the game mechanics that drive it. Now, I do normally deliver this particular talk to novelists or screenwriters, but the whole point, as I say, is that a great story is a great story, no matter the medium in which you're working, even if it's an interactive one. So, as we go through, I will also point out how this applies to your games. First, let me take a moment to talk about the writing process, which largely consists of these three elements: skill, confidence, and doubt. This is a non-scientific graph representing skill versus confidence over time. You may have seen it before. Its point is that in any endeavour, not just writing, and in fact not only creative pursuits, but anything where we're learning a new skill or acquiring new knowledge, we find that it doesn't go in a straight line. We don't get 1% better every day without fail, and our confidence doesn't get 1% stronger every day without fail. Why is that? Well, a lot of it has to do with recognizing our limitations. The more we know, paradoxically, the more we know that we don't know, and that we still have to learn in order to feel like we've achieved mastery. Now, why do I mention this here? Because many of you will hopefully take knowledge and ideas away from this weekend and be inspired to use what I'm going to talk about and what many people here have talked about in your stories. And as you do so, you may worry that you're not doing it right, or maybe the result just sucks, or whatever. I'm here to tell you that that is good, it is necessary, and don't panic. There's your second Hitchhiker's reference. Something often said to and about creative people, including writers, is, "Oh, you're so talented." And that may well be true, but in a way it does us a disservice, because while talent may be necessary to be a successful creative, to be honest, the jury's out even on that, but let's just say it is not sufficient. Raw talent can give us a head start, it can spark an interest, but it can't carry us through a career. It certainly isn't sufficient to guarantee success in a cutthroat and unforgiving creative industry, which is all creative industries. What's required in addition to talent is skill. And skill is something that none of us are born with. It is something that can only be acquired through hard work, effort, failure, and experience. And it has no upper bound. Unlike in video games, there is no maximum skill level in life. There is always more to learn, and realizing that can make our confidence waver. But you need confidence in order to be creative, and especially to write, because our skills are invisible. It looks just like typing, and any old fool can type, and many fools who do think that that also means they can write stories. We know different, and you must have the confidence to believe it and to say so. You must believe that you have a story worth telling to others, whether the audience is 5 people or 5 million people, and that you have the skill to do so, and that takes self-belief and confidence. But you mustn't be overconfident, because doubt is also necessary. Self-doubt is what keeps us on our toes creatively and makes us strive to ensure that every story we tell is better than the last. Without that element of doubt, we become complacent and our work suffers for it. Years ago, I read an interview with a legendary actor. Now, I confess it was so long ago that I do not remember exactly who it was with. It might even have been like Olivier or somebody. It was a long time ago. And he was asked if after all these years he still gets stage fright. And he said, yes, of course I do. And the day I don't is the day that I will hang up my hat and retire. Because it means I still care. Now, you may also be familiar with the metaphor that writing a story is like wading out to sea. And just when you're up to your neck in the water, you're standing on tiptoes, and if you take one more step, the beach will disappear from under your feet. That is the most interesting and exciting place to be as a creative, and it's where you will produce your best work. For me, there is nothing more exciting than getting into the weeds of writing a story and suddenly realizing that I've bitten off more than I can chew, and I'm not sure if I can pull this one off. That is good doubt. That is the kind of doubt that you should nurture. But you mustn't let it overwhelm you, because then it can paralyze you, and that's how you wind up with writer's block, which to my mind is simply fear. The fear of writing something bad that everybody will hate and mock you for and judge you for. That is a real fear. It's totally understandable. But there is a simple cure, and it's called revision. or as we in games would call it, iteration. You can always revise and rewrite your work before anyone else will see it. But you can't rewrite a blank page. So write your first drafts with abandon and freedom, putting any old shit on the page, or in Google Docs, whatever. Safe in the knowledge that once you get to the end, you can go back and rewrite every single word if you want to. That's how you beat writer's block. All right, enough pep talk. Let us get to the main event. As I see it, there are 7 fundamentals to a great story. If you stick to these, you almost can't fail to produce something that your audience will find engaging and compelling. Now, just to clarify, what I'm talking about here are fundamental elements that will fit any genre, any medium, any format. It is not about structure or script formatting or some kind of formula where you fill in the blanks at one end and then extruded story product comes out the other. It's not that, and it's most certainly not this bullshit. Which to this day continues to both amuse and horrify me. I mean, look at that fucking thing. Has any real writer ever actually used this to plan out a story? It's insane, insane. So this is not about any of that. There are plenty of people out there who will teach you about story structure and inciting incidents and third act reversals. Some of them even know what they're talking about. But this is not that. This is about fundamentals that you should bear in mind no matter what you are writing. So these are our 7 fundamentals. I'll go through each of them in turn in detail, but let's go through them all briefly now. Real characters at the center of a story, making bad decisions that feel emotionally true in a sequence that satisfies the audience by connecting events together in poetic ways. So let's begin, logically enough, with number 1, real characters. What does that mean? Well, how you define real can be quite different according to what genre you're working in, and even the medium. There are details and nuances that will shift according to the situation in which your characters exist. But there are a few fundamental aspects of good, real, relatable characters that your audience will want to spend time with. The first of these is simply that they must be engaging. Oh, hang on, I've gone too far. What does engaging mean? It means that readers must find them interesting, relatable, and believable. It means that your characters should behave in ways the reader would or wishes they would if they were in that situation. Now, obviously, in games, we actually have a bit of an advantage because the main character's actions are largely dictated by the player. So the player is obviously going to behave in ways that they feel are appropriate for the situation. But even in games, there will be other characters, NPCs, sidekicks, villains, so on, who aren't controlled by the player. And they should feel just as real as anyone else. Now, you may be thinking, actually, I'm making a Limbo-like game with a silent, silhouetted protagonist and no other characters, so this doesn't apply to me. But actually it does, because you can argue that things like the design of that character, their animation, even their idols, are all part of making them feel real. Although, obviously, that is an edge case. Now, I said in ways that the reader wishes they would behave, but it's important to note this isn't about wish fulfillment. Why? Because in order to be engaging, a character must also be flawed. In fiction, few people really want to read about a perfect character. And in games, okay, well, there are certain genres where we might want to become a perfect character, but in games with any kind of narrative focus, which, you know, I would hope everybody in this room is thinking about, you should really strive to avoid that, because it's dull. None of us is perfect. None of us is without flaw. I always use Superman as a good example of this. Like, physically, he is basically a perfect specimen with no flaws, thanks to the whole superpowers thing. He flies, he's super strong, he shoots lasers out of his eyes, yada yada. I mean, there's kryptonite, but that's not really a flaw, that's a weakness, and, you know, there is a difference. So physically, he's flawless, but mentally, he's flawed. Sure, he's smart, although he's not a genius, but more importantly, he has a big, big blind spot, which is that he is naive. He is too trusting, and he cares about people. Superman always looks for the good in everyone, and that often puts him at a disadvantage when faced with cruel psychopaths. Bullets may ricochet off him, but he can still be hurt. And that is what makes a good Superman story interesting. So, real characters, meaning characters whose actions, responses, and emotional lives feel true to their context and are engaging. I keep saying context because obviously what makes a character feel real in, say, a gangland action drama is going to be very different to what makes a character feel real in a sci-fi space opera or a YA urban fantasy or a generational saga and so on. But whatever your context is, characters who behave in ways that feel real will connect to the audience, and that is always the goal. So, real characters at the center of a story. Now, this one is quite literal. Your story should center around your protagonist. That is what makes them the protagonist. If your character is not the one making big decisions, taking actions that change the story, and hogging the spotlight, frankly, then that is probably not actually your protagonist. In which case, you need to find the character who is doing all of those things and recenter your story around them. Now, if you don't have a character doing all these things, then you're in danger of creating a non-story where stuff just happens. Now, I'm not going to say that's always a mistake, because if done consciously, it can be interesting, even in interactive experiences, but it's not what we're here to talk about. To be honest, it rarely makes for an engaging story. The one caveat to this is that if you're writing an ensemble piece where several characters are all equally important, but if you're doing that, it's important that you recognize and acknowledge it by making sure that those qualities are spread around your group. If you don't, if you've got, say, 5 characters, but only 2 of them are doing making all the big decisions and hogging the spotlight and all of that, then maybe you're not actually writing an ensemble after all. Maybe you just have 2 co-protagonists and their sidekicks, which is fine, but again, recognize that and act accordingly when writing the story. Now, a common objection to this is that it's too convenient for one character to have so much story weight put upon them. It's too much of a coincidence that all this stuff happens to them and that they're the most important person and everyone else lets them make the big decisions. But that is why they're the protagonist. Readers and players, in our case, we want the main character to be at the center of the action. We want the protagonist to be the most important person in the story and in the world of the story. I promise you, if your story is good enough, no one will complain about your teenage boy from a remote farmstead who just happens to find a retired knight and is given a magic sword and then rescues a princess and is revealed as one of the best pilots in the galaxy, and he fires the torpedo that destroys the villain's moon-sized mega-weapon, and oh yeah, he also turns out to be the villain's long-lost son. Like, seriously, it's fine. Protagonists are protagonists for a reason. Make them the most important person. Let them do all the things and make all the decisions. Is it realistic? Hell no. But as long as it's plausible within your story, and there's the issue of context again, the audience will be fine with it. In fact, they probably won't even notice. Plausibility trumps mundane realism every time. So, real characters at the center of a story. Making bad decisions. Now, this doesn't mean that your character should be completely stupid and make bad decisions all the time. And if your character happens to be a mega competent operator, who's simply fighting to stop the bad guy's plot, well then you might think that this doesn't apply to you. But it does, because bad decisions are what make a story interesting. If everyone made the right decisions all the time, well, we would live in a much better world. But our stories would be incredibly boring. So instead, make sure that your characters are not too sensible, or in particular, too cautious. Some examples are obvious and they're tied to genre tropes. Horror, don't go in the cellar. Crime, just call the police for heaven's sake. Romance, tell him you love him, etc., etc. But others are more subtle. A wife who knows that revealing a secret will alienate her husband, but if she doesn't, he might find out anyway, and so she's convinced herself that she can explain it in a way that will win him over. 2 brothers. The younger brother does something really stupid that spells disaster, and now the older brother, who's a cop, must betray his duties in order to protect his family. Or let's have the mega competent operator again. They might be aware of the threat, but they simply underestimate its danger and potential damage until it's almost too late. These are all bad decisions. They drive conflict, and conflict is what makes a story interesting. They also, in a funny way, can reinforce making a character feel real. I mean, hands up anybody who has never made a bad decision ever in their entire life. No liars in the audience. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. What is important is to justify these decisions so that they don't make a character seem stupid. Have a reason for the character to make the decisions that they do. Now, sometimes that will take the form of a dilemma, like in the example with the two brothers, one of whom's a cop. Sometimes it'll simply be because the character is acting on bad or incomplete information, or they're making wrong assumptions, such as the wife or the mega competent operator. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Justifying bad decisions like this in a way that doesn't seem dumb can be one of the most difficult parts of writing a story. But it's worth it, because one bad decision like that can drive an entire narrative if it's strong enough. And several more throughout the story can really ratchet up the tension and the conflict. Just to reiterate this point again, do not make your character stupid just for the sake of the story. We've all seen it, where a character does something that makes no sense or is wildly out of character for no good reason other than that, well, if we don't do that, the story's over. No, if that's the case, you've got a problem. Stop, think, figure out how you can justify that decision. Now, that may require you to go back and rewrite a whole bunch of stuff that you've already done. Or maybe you'll realize that actually you can't justify it, and so they simply have to make a different decision. Both of which, they're painful, I know that. But again, it is worth it. So, real characters at the center of a story making bad decisions that feel emotionally true. And in a way, this is the flip side of the previous point. Yes, you have to justify those bad decisions. And good decisions, by the way, may also require, some justification. But you also have to make them feel emotionally true. Remember I said plausibility trumps realism? So does emotional truth. Stanley Kubrick said, sometimes the truth of a thing is not so much in the think of it, but in the feel of it. And what this means is that sometimes you gloss over ugly reality or mundanity so as not to spoil a moment that feels satisfying. Often this applies to a climax, but it can also be used for smaller moments and even for aspects of setup and world building. Within Kubrick's own canon, for example, even in a supposedly cold and logical movie like 2001, there are moments which don't make complete logical sense, but they feel right. Like the Stargate in the final sequence, that's an obvious one. But so is Hal. Think of the shutdown sequence in 2001. It makes no real sense at all that it is so ridiculously complicated and difficult, but it feels right, and it generates a scene of high tension. Also, can anybody tell me why Dr. Floyd is the only passenger on a commercial shuttle flight to the moon? How are they making a profit? Doesn't matter, because those moments feel right. They are emotionally true. One of my favourite examples of this is two of the Daniel Craig Bond films, Skyfall and the very next movie, Spectre. Now, both films are directed by the same guy, by Sam Mendes, and yet they couldn't be more different. Skyfall is thrilling, it's kinetic, it's tense, it's filled with action, it's a real roller coaster of a movie. But if you stop to think about the plot for even a minute, it all breaks down. It makes no sense. It relies on multiple huge coincidences. The villain's plot only works because of amazing happenstance that he couldn't possibly have foreseen. Story-wise, it is a right old mess. By contrast, Spectre is a well-constructed story that makes sound, logical sense, where all the pieces fit together and are connected. The villain's plot hangs together well, all the sequences feel like they naturally follow on from one another, and it's unspeakably dull. It's just arse-numbingly tedious. I would rather watch and have watched Skyfall 20 times before suffering through Spectre again. Now, obviously, the ideal is to do both. To have a story that is both thrilling and tense while also making sound logical sense. And plenty of stories do that, by the way. It's not like this is some unattainable holy grail, just for James Bond for some reason. But when push comes to shove, emotional truth resonates more strongly with an audience and will stay with them for much, much longer. We remember characters more than plot. Even the big moments that stick with us, they do so because of the characters involved and how engaged we are with them. Think of the end of Avengers Endgame, like when Captain America picks up Thor's hammer. That is an all-time great moment of cinema, but it only means anything because of who these characters are and what we have watched them go through up to that point. The other part of this is the importance of giving your characters an emotional inner life that rings true. Everyone knows how it feels to be anxious, nervous, afraid. Everyone also knows how it feels to be happy, in love, confident. Great characters feel all of these things. They don't go through a story like a robot with zero emotion. Like even robots, like, have you seen Murderbot? You know, come on. We remember the characters who feel, who go through the highs and lows of human experience so that we can sympathize with them. So, real characters at the center of a story, making bad decisions that feel emotionally true in a sequence that satisfies the audience. And what I mean by this is really simple. Remember that you are telling a story. Now, there's an obvious exception for mood painting literary stuff, certain brand of cinema, casual games with no narrative. But if you are, again, writing a narrative, and I assume most of the people in this audience are, then just remember that. It is surprisingly easy to forget, especially when you're lost in the weeds of your 10th draft or whatever. The cat sat on the mat is not a story. The cat sat on someone else's mat. Now you're talking. Every narrative sets up a story question at or near the beginning, and the audience will expect that question to be answered. That is the promise that you make to an audience. I'm going to tell you a story about this cat who sat on someone else's mat. Can you believe it? And the audience says, okay, cool. So tell us what happened when the other cat came back. If you don't answer that question, you have broken your promise to the audience. And if that's not the question that you want to answer, then you need to set up a different story question instead. Now, all of this does not mean that your story must have a happy ending or that the ending should be predictable. Not at all. In crime fiction, for example, which is where I do a lot of my work, subverting expectation can be as simple as the killer is somebody that the audience didn't expect. That is a really common one in crime fiction. It's kind of, the subgenre of crime that I write in practically relies on that in every single book. And I work very hard to misdirect the audience along the way. But it could also be the killer gets away with it. Nobody's expecting that. Now, that's risky, something like that, because in almost all genres, audiences expect the good guys to win and justice to be done. But you can do it, and if you've put in the work everywhere else to justify it, then the audience will still be satisfied. On a wider scale, what you must remember is that the audience will see everything in your story through the lens of that story question that you've set up. If your 19th century romance story question is, will they fall in love? But then you spend more than half the story writing about Napoleon, because, look, that was important stuff happening at the time, right? But if Napoleon has nothing to do with whether or not the characters fall in love, the audience will be unsatisfied, and they'll likely throw the book across the room, or in your case, the controller. So with every scene, every sequence, think, what will the audience expect to happen here, and what will satisfy their anticipation in the story? You don't have to, and you probably shouldn't, give them exactly what they expect. Sometimes it is better to surprise them with something completely different. There's a screenwriting truism that says in every scene, a character should want something. And the best way to end that scene is either for them not to get it, or to get it, but not in the way that they either wanted or expected, which leads to further conflict. But whatever you do, you must have a reason for it. You must consider why this scene is happening within the context of your story and what effect it will have on the audience from this moment on. I'll talk about that more in a moment. For now, I'll finish this bit by saying, don't be afraid of tropes. Think about how you can use them and manipulate them and even subvert them. Now, as I mentioned, I write a cozy crime series of books, and within that subgenre, I know the audience wants there to be a big gather the suspect scene at the end, where the detective explains who done it and how they did it. So I give it to them. If that's the kind of book that I'm reading, I want that myself as a reader. But what I do is I try to surprise them with how I deliver that scene or where it's delivered. So it has a twist, but the fundamental scene, the fundamental trope is still there, because without it, I know that my particular audience will feel unsatisfied. I'm not saying fill your story with tropes, of course, but don't automatically discount them. They exist for a reason, and they can work wonders in satisfying an audience. So, real characters at the centre of a story, making bad decisions that feel emotionally true in a sequence that satisfies the audience by connecting events together. As I said before, once you set out your story question, that is the lens through which the audience will see everything that happens in your story. They will assume that everything is related or has some importance to the central premise. Writers build stories in many different ways. Everyone here will have a different way of working. Some of us start at the beginning and go right through to the end. Some of us write the most exciting parts first and then fill in the blanks in between them. Some of us plot and plan meticulously, and some of us wing it as much as we can to keep things fresh. Some of us write character biographies before we begin. Others find the characters in the process of writing. It doesn't really matter. You do whatever works for you. But the point is that before an audience sees it, we know everything. We are like fifth dimensional beings who can step out of time and see this story, the whole thing, from beginning to end and every moment in between. But that is not how audiences experience stories, at least not the first time around. They build a story piece by piece, layer by layer, in their mind as they experience it, as we tell it to them. Every new scene, every new line of dialogue, every character emotion is experienced only in the context of what's come before and anticipation of what is yet to come. So if you throw in something that doesn't seem to make sense, the audience will say, okay, but they will file it away for later. And before all's said and done, they will expect an explanation of how it connects to the story you're telling them. Now, you don't have to over-explain. You don't even have to explicitly tell the audience how those building blocks connect, so long as you drop enough hints. Audiences are smart. They are smarter than we sometimes give them credit for. And you can leave it up to them to figure things out along the way. You can be ambiguous along the way and reveal all at the end. Or you can be clear and plain throughout the story, making the sequence easy and logical to follow. And of course, you can also be ambiguous at the end itself. You don't necessarily have to explain yourself to the audience, and there can be enormous power in letting an audience figure things out for themselves, especially these connections that we're talking about. When we as an audience reach a conclusion on our own, even if we've been led to it by the author, then it hits harder and it makes a stronger impression. And games are really good at this because we require our audience to take action and to participate. So you can do that, but if so, you must still be able to explain it to yourself. If you know the connections, and if someone asked you could explain it to them, sometimes that's enough. Just be careful, obviously, because you're putting yourself at risk of people saying that it doesn't make sense or it's unsatisfying. But if that's what's true to the story, then by all means, stick to your guns. The point is that audiences will expect connections to exist, and they will look everywhere for them. There's a phenomenon called pareidolia, which you may be familiar with. It's what happens when we perceive what we believe to be patterns in things that are actually unrelated, like seeing shapes in clouds, or a face on Mars, or hidden satanic messages in music. Some people believe that pareidolia is actually really important to creativity, that it's how people like us take stimuli, from the world around us. But it's also worth bearing in mind when we think about how audiences perceive our stories. Think about how you perceive stories. We are always looking for those patterns, for that connection, the elliptical plot, the callback, the sly reference. We can't help but be on the lookout for these things because it's in our nature. And when we find them, we feel good. So the more that you can connect every scene, every event, every paragraph, every line of dialogue back to your story question and to events that occur elsewhere in the story, the more your audience will be engaged and lose themselves in your narrative. So, real characters at the centre of a story, making bad decisions that feel emotionally true, in a sequence that satisfies the audience by connecting events together in poetic ways. Now, this has two meanings. First, poetic in the sense of justice. This is about satisfying the audience again, but it's specifically about doing it in a way that acknowledges that this is fiction and you're telling a story. Like I said, remember that. Not by breaking the fourth wall, I mean, you can do that, of course, if it fits, but also by doing things like wrapping up loose ends, your B-plots and so on, ending with a parallel to how the story began. That's what's called an elliptical story shape. Moving on to a new beginning, one that suggests that the wisdom gained in victory will lead our protagonist into a brighter future. These things, let's be honest, rarely happen in real life. But stories have to make more sense than real life because it's what we expect. We have expected it for thousands of years of our storytelling tradition. Now, you don't have to do all of these, especially if you feel that they're not all necessary to send the audience home feeling satisfied. But when you really look at them, actually, you'll find that a surprising number of stories do. Even a basic like action thriller will often employ all three of these techniques as part of its ending. And if you're writing, say, romance, whether comedy or not, it's practically essential that you cover all of these. Now, the second meaning of poetic is in the sense of your writing. You don't have to write deathless prose to make a great story. Plenty of great stories are actually written quite plainly. In his wonderful book on writing, Stephen King says the basic rule of vocabulary is use the first word that comes to your mind if it is appropriate and colourful. To use a personal example, I made a conscious decision to write my dog sitter detective books in simple, straightforward language. I don't want the reader to be impressed by my beautiful prose. I want them to be completely wrapped up by the story and with its characters. Now, that doesn't mean it's artless or that I don't care. It's actually a lot of fucking work. And certainly nobody would accuse Stephen King of not caring about his work. Richard Bachman, maybe. But not Stephen King. You can be poetic without resorting to $10 words. Poetry is not in the number of syllables, it's in the placement, the rhythm, the choice of words. Now, even there, when I wrote this, originally, that phrase was the placement, the rhythm, the word choice. Oh, that's not as good, is it? It doesn't sound as good. It doesn't fit the rhythm of how I talk. It just doesn't feel right. So you've got to think about these things. Think about alliteration, metaphor, simile, subtle rhyme, even internal rhyme. Read it aloud. Listen to the rhythm of your words, and your dialogue especially, to enliven your work, and inject just a bit of poetry. Audiences might not consciously notice, but subconsciously it will affect their experience. There's an additional bonus stage here for games that I want to talk about just to this audience. Earlier I mentioned the power of ambiguity in endings. It can also apply to moments along the way, or to the whole way that your writing is set up and delivered to the player. Especially in the indie space, players are very tolerant of ambiguity, which is a wonderful thing. We often actively enjoy it when we're engaging with an indie game. And because of the interactive, immersive nature of our medium, like you could rely to an extent on players paying attention. And not all of them, I guess, but you know, we're not writing for the press X to skip crowd, fuck them. We are writing for the players who want a story. And with those players, don't be afraid to hold some things back and let them fill in the blanks for themselves. It's a bit old now. I know it's a cliche, but it is a classic example. Think of Dear Esther. That game did not grab people's imagination because of its wonderful graphics, although it did look lovely, or because of its amazing gameplay, of which there was basically none. They didn't go crazy over the prose either. Like the letters that you hear read out, they're perfectly fine writing, but it's not immortal prose. Is Dan here, by the way? No. Look, I'm sure he'd agree anyway, because it's not the point of the game or the story or the experience. What they did instead was they introduced an ambiguity that was matched by the game story. And that game story, by the way, uses these 7 fundamentals that I've been talking about. Now, probably not consciously. I'm sure Dan didn't sit down and tick them off one by one. But that reinforces what I've been saying in a way, because these aren't a checklist. It's universal fundamentals of great stories. And like I said, in this case, you can also add ambiguity to that list. Because what people remember about Dear Esther, what everyone was talking about at the time of its release, apart from the tedious, is it a game, people? Fuck 'em. What people were talking about was how the story question was answered, but not quite. Not entirely, not fully. It delivered just enough to make you think, oh yeah, okay, I get that. But it didn't actually confirm that for you. People remember how that game made them feel rather than what it made them think. And that is poetry. Real characters at the centre of a story, making bad decisions that feel emotionally true in a sequence that satisfies the audience by connecting events together in poetic ways. These are my 7 fundamentals of a great story. Other writers may think differently, but those are the principles that I use to write the best stories I can. And again, notice, there is no mention in there of genre, of tone, in our case of gameplay, or of any format at all. Because a great story is a great story, no matter how it's told. The key is to include all of these elements, but in new, interesting, and unexpected ways. If you can do that, you will tell a great story. Thank you. Do we have a question? We do have time for questions. Oh, okay, brilliant.
I'll set up the next presentation. So you,
before we do, can we have a round of applause, please, for the wonderful BSL interpreters? So hard all weekend. They must be knackered. Brilliant. All right, so who's got a question? Hands up, come on. Come on. I can't have possibly covered everything.
If you don't have any questions, that does make moving to the next talk easier, but do. It's not on.
Doesn't seem to be on. That's fine.
Oh, sorry, I gave you one up.
There we go. Hello. Perfect. My question in regards to your characters, I suppose, essentially having agency over your story, how do you use your fundamentals in regards to something like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, where the whole point is they're to the side while the real story is happening elsewhere?
But they're still the protagonists of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead.
I guess so. I guess
that story, it's a different story.
Yeah.
But it's still, that's the story that happens to them.
Yeah.
Hamlet is not the story that happens to them.
Yeah.
You know? Hamlet is Hamlet's story. That is their story. I mean, yeah, obviously it's playing with the form. I realise that. I understand what you're saying. And yes, it does play with it. It kind of pulls things apart. It's very meta, very deconstructionist. But it is still fundamentally, it's their story. It's about them and their experiences. Even though, yeah, far more important things are happening off to the side, off screen. You know, all their friends are there too, having a great time off camera. But the story, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Dead, is still about them. It still applies. Anyone else? Come on.
Okay, but I didn't need my notes.
One more. All right. I'm afraid they're all at the back, Steve. Sorry.
Where?
Set your hands up again. There was something over there.
I'm going to get the person at the end of the road because it's very easy to get to.
All right. Sorry, last one. I will be here for the rest of the day. I'm not going home till tomorrow morning, so by all means, catch me and badger me if you want to after.
Hooray for being easy to get to. So I was interested because a lot of what you were saying feels like it would work best when you have total autonomy or you have total
Like I said,
control.
this is normally I give this talk to authors and screenwriters.
Yeah, I was wondering, for example, I do a lot of work where there's so many constraints already in place, so many problems to figure out. Like, I was interested in where you would start triaging a problem where you don't have time for rewrites or there's no budget for, what's the thing that you go to reliably to kind of go, oh, well, let's try and salvage this thing.
No time or budget for rewrites? That never happens in games. I've never had that happen to me.
Thank you. So we'll be around for the rest of the afternoon. So thank you once again, our keynote speaker, Antony Johnston.